It's very, very good to be back here. This is number 3, I think, out of 4 in the series. We had Jeff Lynne, of course, from the investor side. We had Debbie Wasco from Love Home Swap, I think it was last week, from the founder side. So today we bring the two together and we get both perspectives. So I'm going to run for about 20-25 minutes, and then do make sure that you all have some questions for both of them. Alex, Northerner in London, wannabe Yank and co-founder of Hassle.com is the way you describe yourself on your Twitter page. You're unemployed right now.
Yes.
We'll come back to that in a second. Eileen Burbidge, who I've interviewed a few times, early stage, I'm taking this straight from Twitter, early stage tech VC, recovering work and techaholic, founding partner of Passion Capital. Let me ask you first, really quick, cocktail party, layperson, you're asked what you do, what do you say?
So I ask people if they've watched Dragon's Den on BBC, and then I tell them, okay, it's nothing like that, but technically it's a little bit like that, and that we get the pleasure of investing in internet startups.
Okay. How about you, Alex?
I tell them I run a business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it?
Yeah. Because the word startup and tech city doesn't mean anything to half of the people in the world, and actually all we're really doing is starting and running businesses. Yeah. We're just doing them on crack, whereas normal people do them more organically. Okay, so you started a business, so we're going to talk about this a little bit more. Your business, Hassle.com. You sold it for 36 million euros or whatever it was. You're not doing anything now. Do you feel this need to get back in, or are you enjoying doing nothing right now? It's really funny. Eileen and I went for a drink before we came here to catch up. Two drinks. Only 2, so we're not drunk, unfortunately. And you have this real dichotomy, this tension inside where part of me is so exhausted and so feels like I've earned a break that I get annoyed when people email me. And then the other part of me is so like keeps having ideas all the time and then has this fear of missing out that I need to get into it. So I'm weaving a very stony path between the two at the moment. All right,
I guess the reason I asked the question, we did a series at Reuters. We stuck entrepreneurs in the back of a black cab. We did a loop of Canary Wharf, and they pitched the idea. And one of the questions I would ask most of them was, do you do this to make a great company, make a fast buck, make 36 million, and then get on with things, or do you do it because you're in it for the long term and entrepreneurship is in your blood, and that's what you're going to do for the rest of your life?
I think I remember when I've met serial entrepreneurs when I was first time out going through the kind of pitfalls and feeling really exhausted, and they go, it just gets in your system, it's like an addiction. And I was like, oh my God, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And actually, they were absolutely right. It is an addiction. I never started Hassle.com because I wanted to make money. In fact, money was the last thing that I wanted. What I wanted to build was something tangible. I wanted a company where people wanted to come to work, and it's a sense of achievement. And what you actually find, and I'm not saying I'm in this class at all, but what you actually find is good entrepreneurs derive their identity from the businesses that they build, which is why when they're without a business, you soon find them with another one, and they just keep going. And so I'd probably say that, yeah, I'm probably quite addicted to being an entrepreneur, and at some point I'll do something else.
Okay, so we'll see you in another business soon.
Well, yeah, because otherwise I could be like a one-hit wonder. I could be Jason Donovan, and actually Hassle's all I ever build. Or hopefully, I'll be more of the kind of, Coldplay, hit after hit.
All right, we'll come back to how you built Hassle and the trials and tribulations of that. What's the hardest thing about dealing with the Eileen Burbidges of the world when you're setting up a business?
Shit.
Because actually, we should probably mention at this point, you went to Eileen for an investment, and Passion did not invest in your company.
That is true.
Right? But so what is the hardest thing of dealing with the Eileens of the world? As an entrepreneur, as a woman, and I know you're going to hate me for saying that, but tell us what the challenges were at the start.
So I think, in fairness, so let's just deal with the Eileen question. Eileen, I pitched a very different business to Hassel.com, to Passion, and they rightfully turned me down at the time, and actually getting so many no's from investors forced us to make changes. So we did a big pivot, and that's when Hassel.com was born, and then that kind of took off. I've been very outspoken about how difficult VC is, and also the fact that I don't know if I would take venture capital money again. I think there are actually not that many businesses that can grow exponentially at the growth rates that you need to warrant taking on board that level of investment. And when you do, if you're not growing 25% month on month, then you ain't cutting it, and you will soon be cast aside. And so the hardest thing for me in dealing with venture capitalists is that most of them are not operational or have never been operational. And actually what they look at is data, and 80% of a business is data and 20% of it is intuition. Right. And the fact they miss that 20% makes it really hard dealing with them.
So what did they miss? What did Passion miss?
Well, they didn't miss anything, actually. They identified the fact that I didn't have a very credible business at the time and politely declined. And we went on to change that business. Okay. And at that point, we ended up raising angel money. So we raised 250, and then after that, we went and raised 6 million, which is not their ticket size. Mm-hmm.
Is it the people or the idea? Or is that a dumb question?
No, it's not a dumb question at all, but I think it depends on the firm and the fund and what their strategy is. Passion is a very early stage venture fund, so we have, compared to the indexes, the Baldertons, the Atomicos of the world, we're teeny tiny. We had a first fund at the time that we met Alex and her co-founders. We had £37.5 million under management. We now have a second fund of £45 million. So we're investing an average ticket size of less than £200,000 for an average of about 15% ownership. So we're talking about companies that are valued at about £1 million at the time that we put our money in. At that stage, it's all about the people. Yeah. And actually, Alex is very kind in saying, we identified that the original business that she and her co-founders were pitching was not something that we thought the fundamentals were appropriate for, but we should have backed them as founders and sort of recognized that maybe with our help, or they did it anyway, they would recognize that business was probably not viable and pivot into something else.
At what point does it shift, though, from being about the people to being about the idea?
I think at Series A, Series B, certainly. I mean, when you get to a point, the whole idea of seed fund financing or founding financing is to help a business get off the ground, get some early validation points, and just sort of validate the business model, the proposition, the fact that there must be a customer base, the fact that you might be able to build a sustainable business off that. Then you go and raise sort of proper equity financing, and I think at that point, it's about the proposition. You want to look at the traction points. You want to look at
Is now a good time and exciting. We'll come on to what you think about London and fintech, et cetera, but is now a good time to be setting up a business in London, would you say?
I think it is a very good time, and I think just my personal opinion is there's never been a better time. So there might be better times in the future, but there's never been a better time if you look historically on the data. So 10 times as much venture capital financing went into London in this last year than had gone in 5 years ago. Twice as much went in 2015 than 2014. If you're an entrepreneur and you're thinking about raising money, there's never been a better time. I think it's going to continue to be good and really strong, but it's never been as good as it is now.
But from your side, Alex, the bar's raised, right?
Sure.
When you go in and you have an idea and people get this momentum now, and they see a lot of people like you coming to them with ideas. How much more difficult would you say it is now than it was when you started out?
I think so. Eileen's right in the sense that there's more money swimming around London, and actually raising seed investment is easier than it was because there's more supply. But as you're alluding to, you're then one of many, and you have to cut through the noise. And so I think, it on balance, it can be as difficult. But I mean, the way that I do business is actually the only thing that actually matters in business is the product. That could be the content you're selling on your magazine, or it could be the product that people are coming and using to get a service, or the product people are using to buy something, like an actual physical product. If you get that right, and it is 10x better than anybody else, then you won't need to worry about marketing, you won't need to worry about financing, and you won't need to usually worry about charging a business model. So things become easy. I think if people are moaning about the fact that it's hard to raise financing or it's hard to grow, it's probably because your product's not good enough. Like, being very, very harsh about it, that's generally what I see, is that the team might be right, but they haven't quite got the product market fit.
Do you, Eileen? You I believe I'm right in saying you're looking a lot at cybersecurity right now, at fraud, identity theft, companies like that. Do you categorize things like that and say, look, these are the businesses that interest us? Sharing economy stuff, maybe not so much right now. How do you make your decisions? Is it something you think cyber is a big space now? Clearly you think it's a big space because you're investing in some of these companies.
Yeah, I think there's two separate questions, or maybe two separate ways that I'd answer that one question. One is actually, as a fund, we are broad-based internet, so we've invested across all sectors. And when we set up in 2011, we actually told our investors, who gave us money to invest and put to work, that we wouldn't do certain things because we thought we'd be very strategic and narrow-minded. We said we wouldn't do a hardware business because it's too capital intensive. We said we wouldn't do a social media business because there were too many of those. We said we were not going to do a photo sharing site because obviously Instagram was already bought by Facebook. We've done all of those. So we end up backing the founders, as I was saying earlier. Having said that, the reason why you might have picked up on the fact that I think some sectors are particularly ripe for investment is because I get asked all the time as a Silicon Valley sort of expat what Britain or what London has to offer that might be unique or might be more valuable than what other hubs in the world could do. And I think that it's possible for a Google or a Facebook to come from Britain. I'd like to see that happen. But if it does happen, I actually think it'll come down to a lot of luck.
Yep.
Because I don't think there's necessarily the natural ingredients here in London or in the UK to make that more likely to happen than, say, Silicon Valley or even New York. However, I think there are some subsectors that there are natural ingredients that will make London much stronger. And I do think cybersecurity with the heritage of GCHQ, I think fintech because of London being sort of one of the financial capitals of the world, I think edtech, and I think medtech and health tech are areas where I think London and the UK can genuinely be world leaders in terms of
sharing economy, does that excite you? Collaborative economy ideas, does that excite you anymore?
Sharing economy does, absolutely, and I think the benefit that the UK has over other markets is actually the regulatory policies. Because I think you'll see, obviously, I mean, Airbnb, Uber, they started in the US, but in terms of regulatory policy and progressive thinking around that from policymakers, it's been better here in the UK. It's a better question for Alex, and I think that's given companies here a greater advantage. Nobody, by the way, I believe, starts a business, I'm sure Alex didn't, because of the macroeconomic climate, nor do they start it because of regulatory policies. No one does that. But what can happen is that it can be a huge advantage. It can really help reduce friction, and it can actually help accelerate a business's traction.
I know you've got to be careful about what you say now. Sharing economy, collaborative economy. Is that going to be your next business? Something in that space?
Probably not. I think for a couple of reasons, it's not because I didn't enjoy being in that space, but when we started Hustle.com, we certainly didn't think we were part of the sharing economy. I tried to get out in front of the story. When you see all of the negative press that it's been swirling for the last 2 years in the US around employment and Uber and all that stuff, I realised that that we had an opportunity to have a good dialogue with government and with the public around the benefits before people started talking about the negatives. For me, the problem with sharing economy has always been that sharing equals altruism, and nobody thinks you should put a dollar mark on that or make money from it. And actually, like, all of the successful sharing economy businesses make a lot of money. And actually, that's right, because they're making money for the people that are using them, but they're also making money. And so I think that actually sharing economy it might not be so much of a thing as we go down the line, because ultimately what's going on in the sharing economy is just what's been going on for years, for decades offline.
So when you hear the Hillarys and the Hillary Clintons and others talking about all the negatives, of the sharing economy, whether it's the way people get paid, et cetera, is that gratuitous, or is that something that we need to worry about when we take a business in the sharing economy, the collaborative thing forward?
Look, I think ultimately what's going on in...
should they worry about it if they're thinking of setting up a sharing economy business?
The US has a very, very different welfare system to Europe. It's the number one issue. So we're not tied to 1099 contract workers in the UK or even in France or Spain. So I think you can park the US discourse. I think that, as Eileen alluded to, this government is one of the most progressive when it comes to not getting in the way of business, and they've very much stayed out of that. And I think that things will evolve. And the way that I liken it to is, if you think of Napster, like however 15 years ago, blazed the trail when it came to kind of peer-to-peer music, and got shot down. and then in comes Spotify and capitalizes. Sometimes you're just ahead of the game and other people mop up after you. So if you said to me, are people going to be booking cleaners online in 25 years time? I would bet everything I owned to say that that is the case. Will it look the way that Hassle.com is doing it? I don't know just yet. It'll really depend on the way that things play out, and it'll depend on the way that things play out at the EU level. And so if I was looking at being in that space, I wouldn't be necessarily looking at what's going on in the UK, I'd be looking at what's going on in the EU. Because the only way that you get a kind of home market as big as the US is if you go throughout Europe. So that has to be on your radar as a UK company.
Back to this people versus idea piece, Eileen. What sort of person are you looking for? And we go back to "Don't be a jerk" as the title of this. Yeah, I don't know if it's
that's what you said.
I don't know if it's something you regret saying, but no. What sort of people are you looking for?
I think it's dangerous to say that we look for certain types of people, because I think one might then presume that we always back the same type of people, but that's actually not quite the case. I think we've invested now in 56 different businesses, and those founders are as different, from one another as night and day. And that's probably because we, as a partnership, I have 2 business partners, we are very dissimilar. I mean, we could not be more different as a 3-person partnership. And so that's why we avoid the, investing in people that reflect yourself. But a few things we look for. Obviously, we look for competency in the kind of area that somebody is wanting to start a business. We look for people who are really, really literate about it, have researched sort of all of the cost-benefit analyses and the pros and cons of doing what they're going to do. But we also look for sort of a lot of soft skills, which is, can this person, through either confidence or subject matter expertise, attract people to the team? Are they going to be able to hire people? Are they going to be able to attract investment? Are they going to be able to attract potential partners and obviously customers and clients? We also look for, I say this a lot, a deep-rooted conviction, which I sometimes think is like a psychosis. I don't know what Alex's was, but in order to do what you need to do and to go through all the trials and tribulations of a startup where sort of almost by definition you are challenging industry incumbents in a certain space, you really need to have a deep-rooted conviction to see that through.
Do you have to be obsessive to do something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Then there has to be a higher purpose. All the good businesses that I know have a mission, and it's a higher purpose beyond being the biggest or making the most money. It's always about something else. And for us, it was very much about the cleaners and empowering basically people who worked. 85% of the UK domestic cleaners work in the black economy, where they've got no protections, no transparency, no nothing essentially. And that we've had some pretty dodgy incidents. So I'm fairly confident in saying it's quite unsafe, and we wanted to empower those people to work on their own terms and pick and choose what they wanted, and that was very much our mission, very much supply led and not. To be honest, I can say this now because I'm not the CEO. I didn't actually give a crap whether the customers, if I made their customers' life like incrementally better, great. You got a house clean, it happened in a quicker time, brilliant. That was never the bit that we were focused on. We were always mission led, and it was always about the cleaners on that side of the platform.
So you look at people, and we talked about this with David Costco last time, a company, a founder who has a purpose, who it might be, a little bit dreamlike, pie in the sky purpose, but for an investor, I'm interested to hear why that makes such a difference.
Yeah, because we've talked to a lot of entrepreneurs, right? And we've talked to quite a few who are extremely intelligent, really, really committed, and probably very good at executional ability and operational ability, who come to a business idea because they have read, the last month's worth, every single article about TechCrunch, every company that's done financing, every sort of business case that's out there, and looked at where a margin can be improved for a certain subsector or a certain space, and where they're convinced they can run a business at greater efficiency and for greater margins than somebody else. Those businesses, in my very sort of limited opinion, have less upside than one that's mission-driven, where the founders are completely, have a deep-rooted conviction, which, by the way, might not be as sort of noble as what Alex's was about sort of enabling and empowering cleaners. It might literally be to prove, as the movie The Social Network showed, an ex-girlfriend wrong. It might be to show your parents that you can do something that they think you can't do.
Yep.
It might be to show a former manager or boss that actually they should have funded your business. But there's got to be a deep-rooted conviction.
And you're so impressed by things like that makes a difference for you investing or not?
100%.
Really?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Even if at the end of the day that it's not that brings you the return.
But it will eventually.
Yeah,
Will it?
because if that
Will it?
person has that conviction and has that dedication
Okay.
and commitment to do it, they will figure out a way to prove to, fill in the blank, former boss, ex-girlfriend, ex-boyfriend, your parents, that they're a success. And that is more sustainable and longer lasting than, oh, I have found a business model where I can get 3 more points on the profit margin than every other business in the space, and I'm going to go do that.
And the reason that that is so important is because it's so hard. Like, I mean, I can't tell you, like, the highs and lows, like, they're just so extreme. Like, one minute you've been out to a meeting and you think that you're going to get an investor that's going to write you £50,000, and the next minute you come in walking back in through the door and your, like, senior developers quit or the check falls away, and it literally goes like this all the time. And you never get off. You never get off that roller coaster. And so unless there's something other than the idea that you can add 3 percentage points on your balance sheet, it has to be more deep rooted. It has to be like a belief.
Yeah.
Like, it has to be that deep rooted for you to keep going, because this business is grit and luck. 80% grit, 20% luck. That's how it happens.
Let's talk about your role in the government as well, or the government initiatives, because you, Eileen, are the government special envoy for fintech. You're the chair of Tech City UK. Alex, you've worked with government with the GTI and other bits and pieces as well. Can you change policy? Can you influence policy? I mean, influence, yes, but can you actually change it, do you think?
I think not always, but as both Alex and I alluded to, the last 5 years, this, and I'm not making a case for a certain party or whatever, but the Conservative-led coalition and then the Conservative Party of the last sort of year, they've been extremely, and I'm the most cynical person in the world, so I can tell you why I think there are political reasons for this, but they've been extremely supportive of the digital sector, extremely supportive and extremely open-minded. They want input. And one of the reasons I started to get involved, because as I realized they would listen to anybody, and I was a little bit worried about that, because we don't want them just listening to everybody who's going to have a word in edgewise. And no, I think they've been extremely supportive. They have done things, for instance, like change tax law so that people who are going to rent extra rooms in their house for Airbnb type situations are not going to suffer tax penalties. They have done things to support peer-to-peer lending, equity crowdfunding. They have done things, obviously, for tax relief on SEIS, EIS, Entrepreneurs Tax Relief. They've done things to support fintech. Samir Desai, who's the founder of Funding Circle, has said that he gave the government a wish list 2 years ago about what would help that business grow, and they actually addressed every single one. I don't think that's always the case. I think it's a rare inflection point of sort of political trade winds supporting what's happening with the new and rising sector, which also illustrates, a sound bite for a long-term economic plan, and then people who have a sort of a personal interest in it. But that's been something that I think has been to our advantage, and to take every leverage opportunity of and try to do that.
You're clearly passionate about fintech. Let's throw in here this idea of us leaving Europe. Is that really scary to you in this sector?
That's all right. I'll say, so I just qualify by saying I have a personal opinion. There's 2 things. I would say, no, first of all, to answer your question at face value, I don't think it's, quote, scary. I think London and the UK economy is strong enough, especially with respect to it being a financial capital of the world, that it's going to be fine. It's not like it's Armageddon, the world's going to collapse. But I do believe, very personally and very strongly, that Britain and the economy is much stronger as a part of Europe. I really believe that, personally. I think the fintech sector is really interesting because you have 300 of the world's banks that have their headquarters in London. You have more American banks that have their headquarters here in London than in America. If we were to leave Europe, it doesn't really make sense for you to have your European headquarters in London anymore. And I think that's a very real problem. And I think that's a challenge for London and the UK. So I think it's better for lots of reasons for us to stay in the EU. I think it's also better for talent, for free movement of highly skilled workers, better for us to be part of a digital single market. It makes us more competitive with the United States, I think, in terms of one of the largest markets. And I also think it just makes us a stronger force. Population of 60 million versus being part of a trade bloc that's over 300 million. To me, that makes a lot of economic sense. I don't think it's the end of the world if we leave. I just think it's far better for us to stay.
I'm luckily I don't have any kind of government official role, so I can be very open. Like, I think it's ludicrous to leave the EU, particularly when the only 2 reasons that I hear people say is one about sovereignty, which is a completely emotional argument, which to me is just bullshit. You don't do business emotionally. And then the second one is around red tape. And I was in Europe very recently. I was in Brussels actually talking to the European Commission and to the Council, and actually you listen to those guys, they've got the right idea. And actually the political will needs to come from the nation states. So they're not stupid, like they're not trying to put red tape in it. So we were talking a lot around they want to create red tape free zones and experiment and test what that looks like. So I think that for me, like the kind of disturbance that will happen for the 2 to 3 years that it takes us to renegotiate bilateral trade deals versus kind of staying in and have a seat at the table and trying to reform. And like, I'll be open, like, I don't think David Cameron's handled Europe all that well. I think he's gambled and the stakes have been too high, and now we're in this situation. So, you know, he needs to rethink his relationship with Europe. But I think for us to fall out for some emotional reason is a little bit silly, really. And I think that's shared by most of the digital community.
Right. I won't ask you to comment on that because we probably are on the record here. So
I'm happy to comment. I've also
has he been foolish, David Cameron?
Oh, about David Cameron's. I mean, I think he has gotten the best deal he felt that he could get. I believe that that's the case. Did he make promises to get something else? I don't know, actually. To be honest, I really wasn't paying that much attention when he made campaign promises. Right. I think things could always be better, but I think things could be far worse. I do think he has negotiated for reform. I think that's incredibly important. I think he's also decided there is sort of a mandate to sort of leverage the democratic process and let the electorate decide what Britain should do, and that perhaps it was going to get more difficult in 5 to 10 years. So I think that it's commendable that it's being put to a vote. I think it's disheartening if we don't trust the electorate to make the right decision. But I think the right decision is clearly to stay in Europe. I really do.
And hopefully it'll just put it to bed once and for all. If we finally have this referendum, maybe we can just move on from it, and it just doesn't be this, because the Tory party's been fragmented on this for years. So,
and, you know, I raise it, you know, as a context for you know, entrepreneurs in this audience who are thinking of setting
I've
up
had
a
very
business.
few entrepreneurs in my role as sort of Tech City chair, or also as a partner at Passion for our portfolio companies. Very few entrepreneurs who have said that they believe their businesses will thrive better outside of the EU. Yeah. And actually that only came up when I got into a very public Twitter spat with Douglas Carswell, who's the only UKIP MP. And so I don't even know if those are real accounts.
Why? Okay.
It's very serious, Axel.
Is it?
Yeah, we're being very serious.
Well, let's get off Europe and talk about something else. You know, actually, let me ask you this. This is also serious. I did this event for Fin for Femme the other night, Women in Business.
Oh, we couldn't avoid the woman question if we were up here, could we, Eileen?
Well, no, we can't hide the women question. I don't think we should. Why are there, actually, let's start with the investor side. Why are there so few women investors?
Why are there so few women investors? I don't know. I mean,
because there are so few women investors, right?
My guess is if we're not just talking about tech, we're just talking about financial services or financial investment services.
You know, I think the number is sort of global VCs. There are 6% of VCs are women.
My sense would be that the reason is that venture capital financing, like other investment financing sort of asset classes, usually harvested general partners from financial services sector and not the technology sector. And so if you did that, I think you could see that the financial services sector has a woeful underrepresentation of women. I think that tech as a sector has a higher representation of women, not great, not anywhere near 50%, but I think probably double that of other industries. And so I think VC is probably a little bit better, tech VC is probably a little bit better than strict financial services.
Do you think, Alex, you know, I'll get your opinion on this, if we had more female investors, there'd be more female entrepreneurs and founders of companies? True or false?
I can't be that specific, I'm afraid. And the reason I can't be that specific is this problem is not isolated to technology. Like, you see it throughout all industries. And we've got industries that have been primarily female-led, like care industries. So, like, I know that male nurses feel this issue the same way as, you know, women in engineering. And I think ultimately, we've always had this sphere where women are meant to be in care and men are meant to do the more aggressive things, and so we have a woeful numbers down. And so to me, and I've said this many times, it's all about women having to be or being cast as a primary caregiver in society, and until that changes, then we will continue to see systemically less women in areas that we would like to see more.
And Eileen, I think, said to you, tell me if this quote's wrong, she said, don't mind what others say, it's easy. when you were having your child? I think that was the quote that I heard from
So
you.
the story behind this is we went to I forget what, it was a panel on investment in women, and I was there, and I was 13 weeks pregnant, and I just raised $6 million from Axel, and I was absolutely shitting myself. I hadn't told anybody, not even my parents. And Eileen and I got talking, and I ended up we'd literally met that night, and ended up just completely confiding in her. And she's like, ignore everybody else. You can completely do this. And it's true, because when I came out and told people, even my mum and everyone else was like, are you going to step down as a CEO? And it was Eileen and Debbie that actually said to me, you can do this. And that's what we did. I ran the company and I had a baby.
I guess the reason I ask you, is
basically I had the baby on the Saturday, I was in the office on the Monday.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
With the baby.
Wow. I think it was a tweet I read of yours, Eileen. You said you don't think of yourself as a woman in tech, and forget tech, as a woman in business, a woman entrepreneur. You're just in tech. You're just an entrepreneur. I wonder, given all the unconscious and the conscious bias and sort of pattern recognition in your business, from the VC side, on the angel side, on the investment side, just wonder how difficult that is.
So I think, I've said lots of things on record, and I actually wrote a blog post for TechCrunch in 2010, which I don't really regret writing, but it was a bad idea because
You got totally annihilated, didn't you?
I got both sides, and I wrote in 2010, I thought that there was a supply side problem, and I didn't necessarily think that tech was any worse than any other industry, and actually I still stand by that. I think it's worth establishing that I think the tech industry is far more meritocratic than any other industry. You look at finance, as we talked about earlier, you look at the legal profession, you look at tenured professors, you look at doctor level sort of practitioners in healthcare. When's the last time you flew on a commercial flight and you heard the captain come over the PA system and say, and it would be a female voice? By the way, I've been on a plane when that's happened, and first of all, everyone on the flight freaks out and gasps. But you don't come across women in so many professional sectors that I actually think tech is far ahead of most other sectors because it is more meritocratic. Doesn't mean it's perfect, and we have a long way to go, but as a personal use case, I've always felt it not to be a hindrance to me. I know that it's been difficult for other people, but I do think there's a supply side problem. So then I think the answer is, or the question is, how do you address the supply side problem? I think to your question just now, how difficult can it be? I will tell you, because I work in a co-working space that has 7,500 square feet with 10 different startup teams. When a woman walks on the floor, everyone knows it. That is a massive advantage, by the way. It doesn't matter what you look like, but you are going to be memorable. And I think if a woman wants to leverage that, you got to back it up, but you are going to be able to stand out better than anybody else. And if you can back it up and bring it, you are much better off than anyone else. I also think, and I've talked about this before, I grew up in the United States, and I grew up obviously as an ethnic minority, Asian American. I'm Chinese by ethnicity. I grew up thinking that I was Chinese principally, not a girl. And so I grew up trying to, sort of dealing with questions like, can you speak English? Yes, I can speak English. I mean, I basically thought that if you were a white girl, it must be so much easier than me. So for me, my identity was more associated with my look and my ethnicity. And so I never thought being a woman in anything was a crutch at all. Yeah. And I think that we will all look for reasons why, there's adversity and why things are difficult. I think short men have a problem. I think fat men have a problem. I think bald men probably have a problem and are probably discriminated against.
I know you want to move on.
I just think,
I wasn't talking about you.
No,
I think one can choose to come up with reasons why day-to-day business life is difficult. Yep. I think you can also own it, and I think if you back it up, anyone can do whatever they want in tech.
I know you want to move on, but I just need to make this one point because I wholeheartedly agree, and we've talked a lot about this. I don't think the narrative that it's being difficult to be a woman leader, a woman in tech, a woman in business, whatever it is, it's not good. Because if you turn around and tell someone all the time, it's difficult to do this, it's hard to do this, why is it going to encourage anyone to give it a go?
This is why I'm loath sometimes to even bring this subject up. Yeah. Should we be talking about this at all?
I've yet to get off a panel where someone doesn't ask me what it's like to be a woman in tech.
That's right, but I would have left here and people would have said to me, it was really remiss of you not to raise it. What should I be doing? Do you know what I mean? There's a balance here.
You can change it though.
Yeah, but when you look at the numbers and you look at the percentage of women on the investment side, it's shocking. Really,
there is a problem. Of course, there's a problem. The stats tell you there's a problem. What I'm trying to say is, getting up and going, "Woe is me," is not helping anybody else. Right. Instead, we sit up here and Eileen's managed to do it and I've had a baby 2 months after raising $6 million and then sold a company. So absolutely, of course you can do it. It's mind over matter. And the biggest thing failing women, I think, is confidence. So I just take a look in the mirror before I go into a difficult meeting and I say, you are the shit.
What? Yeah.
And it does wonders, though.
Yeah.
You should try it.
Yeah.
I don't think you are that
Hey. What excites you most about setting up another business now?
Oh my God, I just love the chaos and the creativity. Because it's just mad chaos.
But you've got some money behind you now, right? So you're in a different position
Depends
than
if
you
I
were
use my own money.
Right.
I don't use my own
whether
money.
it's your own or someone else's, but you're in a different position now than you were when you started Hassel.
Because honestly, there are at least 20 times in getting up and going to bed, 20 times a day where I go, that's really inefficient, that's wrong, that can be done better. And every time you have that idea, it feeds that creative side of you, particularly like the best bit, and everyone always says this, I know when you start a young business, and if any of you out there are in a young business and it's like 2 or 3 of you in your bedroom, you're like, oh my God, I'm never going to get this thing to work, and it's so depressing. But I tell you not, you look back in time, and that is the bit that you miss the most. It's that really hands-on when you're doing everything and you're seeing something come from nothing. And that's I mean, I just got goosebumps on my arms thinking about it. Like, how can you not love that? It gives meaning and purpose. And so, I don't know, I find it easy.
And that's, I guess, Eileen, that's one of the reasons I asked the question at the beginning. Are we in a different zone now? This bar's been raised because there are a lot of people wanting to do, who have great ideas and wanting to do things. The environment's very different now than it was, when you started Passion 10 years ago. Is that what Alex is just describing? What still really excites you about doing what you're doing and finding the good ideas and wanting to invest, or has it really now gone to a completely different level for Passion?
No, I think it is as you described, and I think this is why I also qualified it by saying different funds will have different strategies and different sort of philosophies for why they do what they do. We have intentionally stayed as a very early stage, small seed fund, and so we really want to back the founders who are just getting started on their journey. And my 2 business partners and I, frankly, we do it because we want to live vicariously through these amazing founders. We're just too old. We have too many kids. We have 11 kids between the 3 of us. We can't do it ourselves anymore. And we would love to live vicariously through the founders. That's why we do what we do.
How about you setting up your own business in terms of coming up with an entrepreneurial idea?
We would all do it. We would all do it, and we all have operational backgrounds. No, because I'm too old, and I can't pull. When I worked at Skype, I pulled on average 2 all-nighters a week, and I loved it. It was the best time of my career that I can remember. It's
interesting what you just said. You say you're too old, but we had a question when we were here with Debbie last week, and there was a lady in the audience who said, I'm a woman and I'm in my early 50s, and most people think, forget it. I go to the VCs. You got some guys sitting in front of you, and they're saying, sorry, you're too old.
Yeah, I was being tried about the age, by the way. So okay. I don't think age has a reason to do. I just think because I have 4 children between the ages of 3 and 9. I cannot afford to do 12 all-nighters a week to dedicate to work anymore, so I'm kind of in a different life stage. And that's why we're backing the founders instead of doing it ourselves. I would love to be in it again. But then the other thing I say is not everyone is cut out to be a founder. And actually, I'm one of these people that's been in tech, and I've never been a founder. I've always been part of the very early team. So I came to London to work for Skype originally, was sort of the 5th person in the office here. I've never had the good ideas, ever. I don't have any, I don't have a creative one in my body, but I like working with amazing people.
How about you being an investor? Have you ever thought about that?
Oh my God, I'm the worst investor ever.
Would you?
Yeah, because
But what sort of ideas what sort of thing would you look for if you were wearing the investor hat?
Honestly, I'm not too dissimilar to Eileen. Okay. So there's a company called Amalia that I met when I was doing final decisions at Ignite, and the girl sat down and she was like, "Oh, I'm doing a fashion business," and instantly I went, "Oh." And just totally switched off because fashion tech is just like saturated. And then she started to talk and she just came alive, and she'd got this really unique way of getting to market. And I just was like, and it was the first time I actually wanted to cut an angel check there and then and just be like, here, take my money. So I do think that it's the people that excite you. And because ultimately you always know that those people will find a way through. When the going gets really tough, they will find a way through. Just like we did when we've been flogging Teddle, which was 23 different verticals, trying to be the eBay of local services for like a year. and we kind of got down to our last little bit of money, you know, it was then that we all went, this is crunch time, and we took down the data and we looked at it and we saw that everyone was searching for cleaners and we didn't have any cleaners, and we were like, oh, eureka, there's the moment. And we switched it round, and then, you know, it took off. And you always find that those people who are resilient and determined enough, they'll find a route through the difficulty. That's what you're backing. The idea will never stay the same.
Yeah. Were you surprised how much, I forget the name of the company in Germany that bought you? The company that bought Hassel?
Helpling.
Surprised how much they paid for Helpling? How much they paid for Hassel?
No, not at all, but I don't even know if I know the final number. I mean, I think it didn't surprise me that Hassel was a massive success. And that is probably why we should have backed, even if we didn't believe in Tettle, why we should have backed, you know, Alex and Jules, her co-founder. Because, as she said, you know, they were going to find a way to make their business work, even if the business was different 18 months after we would have invested. But it didn't surprise me at all that they were hugely successful.
And I feel like Hassel was a failure because we only sold it for whatever the reported number is. You know, like I was like, you know, I wanted 100 or 150. I didn't even want to sell it. You know, I just wanted to keep building it. And I think that's what ultimately gets people. It's not the money. Like, you know, I don't really care about the money, to be honest. It was the company and the people in it and the kind of mission that you're on. That's the bit that makes me get out of bed every day.
Thank you both very much for your thoughts and your candor.